The holidays, they're here. I'm not surprised. I feel like I've been buying Christmas presents for the last 7 months, and yet I sound surprised.
I had a strong start, but now I've got fatigue. I think now I'm tired of it. I think I better return to it once this podcast is finished and once the readout is written. I won't multitask. But I find it so interesting. What is happening at Christmas with spending is often a kind of canary down the mine, or a sort of indication of the economics of the coming year. And obviously we're likely to be an election in that year. And it's just interesting, I think, also because people get together with families from different generations. And I think it's probably that moment when voters start to say, yeah, what am I going to do with my vote this year, if they're swing voters, which a large number of people are. So I think, it's I'm really looking forward to hearing from Andrea and Katie, because their copy as well inside Bloomberg is always, isn't it? It's always on point, and it always tells you something about the psyche of the nation.
Yeah, and they have different perspectives. So we'll talk a little bit about luxury, we'll talk about retail, we'll talk about the high street, but we'll also talk about food, which is such a prominent, important thing
of
when
Christmas
you celebrate
Day.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Welcome to In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the conversations and the stories shaping the world of finance. I'm Francine Lacqua with Allegra Stratton. And this week we talked to Andrea and Katie to try and really feel the temperature for shopping across the UK. We're delighted to be joined by Andrea Felsted, Bloomberg Opinion columnist covering consumer goods and the retail industry, and Katie Linsell, Bloomberg UK retail reporter. So this is like a deja vu. We did this exactly 12 months ago, and everyone was excited about Christmas because there was like revenge Christmas, and people, after 2 very long years of lockdown, were going to get together. This year just feels a lot different.
Yes, lockdown is still in our living memory, so I think people do want to get out and shop, but we've had a really ongoing cost of living crisis now, and so people are really looking at how much they can spend. And I mean, my view is that it's going to be a bit of a doom and gloom one. I don't know if Andrea is quite so negative as I am, but already we've seen November sales were weaker than people hoped, so I'm a bit negative on this one.
I don't think it's going to be a sparkler, but I don't think it's going to be a stinker either. It's going to be kind of fair to middling. Last year, I was absolutely convinced it would be a good Christmas, and it turned out to be so because, as Katie said, it's the first year for 3 that we didn't have any COVID restrictions. This year, I'm not quite so optimistic. On the plus side, we haven't got as many strikes as we had this time last year. If you look around this time last year, it was actually snowing, always bad for footfall. Inflation is coming down, so that's all pretty good stuff. On the negative side, as Katie said, the cost of living crisis has not gone away. And on heating, we're not getting the government support. Plus, interest rates are probably more of a worry this time for this Christmas than they were a year ago. So a bit of a ho-hum Christmas. It's not ho-ho-no, but it's not ho-ho-hooray either.
This is what we're here for. She's too good.
Too good.
Can I just ask a question, which is that sort of lockdown is still in people's memories? Does that affect buying? Does it affect buying because they've still got some COVID savings saved up? Or does it affect buying because people are actually thinking, oh, I remember 2 years ago when we couldn't leave our houses, I'm going to go and shop? Like, how does it interact?
I think the COVID savings have really started to be eroded by now. That's something that retailers really kind of rode on over the past year or so, saying even though we have this terrible inflation, people really saved over COVID. I think now the key comparison to make is that people are really getting out to shops. You know, we're yet to see how much they're spending when they're in these shops. But when you're around London and some of the key
really
shopping
busy,
districts, it is busy. People can get out now with less of a fear of a pandemic. And they're in restaurants, they're in bars, they're in all the kind of great shops of London. So that's really encouraging. And online has come back a bit. Having said that, I think online will still have its time over Christmas. I personally am going to be glued to my screen doing boring online shopping. But yes, I think the pandemic is still a key comparison period.
I think there won't be that automatic lift that we got last year because everybody was out seeing family and friends again. I just don't think we're going to get that surge that we automatically got. So retailers, restaurants, they're all going to have to work harder for everything this year.
So, like, what are people buying? I mean, what do people not want to buy?
I think gifting is the key area where spending is actually coming back a bit. So PwC, their figures for spending over the Christmas season is 13% down at 20 billion. So really, it sounds bad on the part of consumers, but it's an area where if you have people you don't have to gift to, don't. If you have people who you do love a lot, you're going to be spending gifts on them, but you might spend a little bit less. Having said that, Black Friday wasn't the big boom that was hoped. It's kind of turned more into a Black November. And the British Retail Consortium said it got off to a really good start, that sort of Black November, and then kind of fizzled out towards the end. So I think people are being a bit more frugal with their gifting and really being quite careful with where they spend their money.
And I think the other area that's really suffering at the moment is big ticket items. You know, any big, other than holidays, which still seems to be doing well, but sort of home renovations, home furnishings. Even Halford said that people weren't spending on expensive bikes as much. Now, one thing that I thought was really interesting last year, the big gift was the Dyson Airwrap. This year we've seen like £100 off. It's back to full price or nearly its normal £480 price in many places, but it's still that was a big discount on an expensive purchase. So I think it's those big where you have to spend a lot of money that are really being reined in.
Yeah, like watches and jewellery, these items that you might think would be a go-to for gifting at Christmas, people are really pulling back on those treats.
So they're pulling back on the big amounts, but are you seeing that there's more smaller amounts? They're sort of spreading the love more.
I think it's hard to know. I mean, if we look at sort of fashion, I think that's going to be a tricky area over Christmas.
Makeup,
yeah. We talk about the lipstick index, don't we, in this kind of economy. So I think people are going to be going for sort of affordable beauty items, affordable clothing here and there. I mean, one of the items that I hear is doing very well is this thing called a snuggle hoodie.
Snuggle hoodie,
which is where absolutely, because it's sort of snuggly, fleecy, goes over your head, covers your whole torso, and I think there's also a read across here to energy bills. You know, if you can kind of turn down your heating a bit and be in your snuggle hoodie, that's the way to go, and they're not very expensive.
I think Katie's touched on something really important here. Looking back on this year, it's been much better than people have expected. I mean, Next said that the consumer had really defied gravity this year, and I think Katie's exactly put her finger on why, because we've all adapted. So we've worn a snuggle hoodie indoors but turned our heating down. We've shopped in Aldi or Lidl, or we've bought own label products. So we've really adapted to the situation, which is why consumer spending has been so much better this year than I predicted back last year.
My favourite is the electric heater, the mattress topper, which I bought quite a few of.
What is that? Sorcery, which I need in my life.
Well, it is. But you have to, my kids put it on 3, and then when they're asleep, I have to go and turn it down. They kind of cook in their beds. So we saw recently, I think it was last Friday, we saw a survey of the electorate, it was not the electorate, of consumers. And their expectations of inflation are that it comes down. What do you think with your expertise? What does it impact your beef?
I think it is going to come down. I think food prices are going to come down. And my prediction for next year is we get a supermarket price war. Because and the way this will happen is through promotions, because the big branded manufacturers have ceded a lot of volume to private label, and they will want to try and claw that back. They don't want to necessarily reduce prices, but you will see a lot of special offers, and the supermarkets will fight for those sales. And the way that they'll do it is through their loyalty cards. The other really interesting thing about food is when inflation is rising, everybody can win because everybody's sales goes up. When it comes down, particularly if costs are still going up, like we've got with the minimum wage going up, they all have to fight for share. And what they need like weak players to feed off. And at the moment, we've got 2. We've got Morrison's, we've got Asda, both in private hands. So I predict a supermarket price war to put pressure on Morrison's and Asda. So I think that will feed into bills next year.
And what's happening with John Lewis?
Well, and their ownership of Waitrose and how Waitrose is performing. I mean, it depends. If we look at John Lewis, I think this Christmas is so crucial, and we won't hear from them until March to know how it's gone. But really, they need to really show their strength in this environment. Online is quite key for John Lewis. And I think they're competing with the likes of Amazon, who can get the delivery to you the next day. And it's really tough. Going to Andrea's point about the supermarket price war, I think Waitrose is in a really weak position. They desperately need some funding to invest in their stores and pull in shoppers. And I think a lot of those high-end shoppers who are doing relatively well through the cost of living crisis are going to M&S instead. Christmas is the kind of time of year when Waitrose should be really getting shoppers in through the door for canapes and party treats and all that sort of thing. And I think it's yet to be seen if they manage that this year. So it's going to be really tough.
Well, Katie, you said it's a shame we have to wait until March, I think you said, for John Lewis. Or what? What happens if it's been a bad Christmas? What happens?
Well, for the other retailers, we get lots of January updates. So we do find out relatively soon on how their trading has gone. January last year, we had lots of the supermarkets, as Andrea said, with the impact of inflation, lots of supermarkets coming out saying, oh, we had a record Christmas. Shoppers really spent with us. Of course they did, because prices are so high in food. We're all sort of spending more to get less. I think this coming January with food, it's going to be another story of a bumper Christmas of spending. I think Kantar are forecasting just over £13 billion of spend, a record. So yeah, we will see how things go in the early new year.
It is a record because it's more expensive.
It is, yeah. And also, of course, food is a necessity. We all have to buy it. At Christmas, we trade up. We buy the more premium items. Even if you're still sticking to your Aldi and your Lidl, you're buying your more premium items within those supermarkets. So it should go well in that sector of retail.
We had loads of supply chain issues, didn't we, last year? I mean, I remember buying Christmas presents in like October because Andrea came on TV and said, it's going to be really difficult to get hold of Lego. We didn't have any of that.
No, that's really gone away. That's really gone away now. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we saw quite a lot of discounting on Black Friday, because last year, last year we had problems, and I think the year before was a really bad one. Last year it was coming to an end, and also people had a lot of stock last year because they'd bought loads early because they didn't think they were going to get it. Supply chain eased up. It all arrived, particularly in the US, just when people were, pulling in the purse strings. So they were all stuck with too much stock. So no, I think the supply chain is pretty much back to normal this year.
How's the luxury market doing? I mean, again, the price up, they've been able to bump up prices so much, it's almost a little bit obscene.
Exactly. Luxury is really slowing. So it's taken a while, but as with many of the pandemic spending habits, it's taken a really long time for them to unwind. But it is really unwinding on luxury. As Katie mentioned, those pandemic savings, we had nothing else to do without our money. So for a man, it was a Rolex. For a lady, it was a new handbag. That really powered the luxury market. That's really unwinding. And I'm not optimistic that the Chinese consumer is going to come back and save the day, because obviously the Chinese VIPs treated very well at home now. All the brands have wonderful stores, wonderful service in China. The middle class are going to be under pressure from the weakening economy, plus the inflation in flights, hotels, that sort of thing. So I'm not convinced the Chinese consumer is going to ride back to Europe and spend, and particularly the UK is very difficult in that market because of the loss of tax-free spending.
Yeah, when you talk to luxury retailers in London as well as hoteliers, high-end restaurants, they are really, upset about the fact that we have this so-quoted tourist tax. This is the time of year when you would want wealthy foreign shoppers to be coming to London. And I was in Selfridges recently. I mean, it still looks fantastic. It's still packed with shoppers. But really, it's not the kind of Christmas that we've had in previous years, because people are choosing to spend in Paris and in Milan. You've even got British shoppers buying their Burberry and their Mulberry outside the UK because it's cheaper. So it is a very tough environment there.
So can I ask you a sort of helicopter view question? Have you both talked in amazing granularity about British shoppers? But really, fundamentally, do you think people will be feeling comfortably off this Christmas or really under pressure? What's the sort of macro picture? Because the reason I ask the question is the government's view is If people in the months prior to an election feel all right, then that's a sort of decent basis on which to go to the electorate. So it's not actually a kind of many years previous comparison people make. People don't think like that. People think, do I feel a bit better than last Christmas, basically?
I think it's going to really depend who you are, what your income is. Do you have a mortgage? How much of your spend do you spend on essentials? It's, I think older people have done very well this year. Many of them don't have mortgages. They've seen their pensions go up. They've seen their investments go up. For the first time, they're actually getting a bit of return on their savings. But I think younger midlife families will be really suffering from the interest rate rises. School fees have gone up like massively. If you want a holiday, you're having to spend a lot more on a holiday. So I think, and then you've got the very lowest consumer that spends a lot more money on essentials, have really been hurt by food, energy. So I don't think you can say like one consumer. Exactly.
And of course, I think the interesting thing is that older population, for all that they've done very well, they do care about their children and their grandchildren. If they can see that they're having a difficult Christmas, it's not straightforward that they feel sort of smug.
The other thing, I think there's two things that really are going to matter as we go into next year. One is the labour market and one is the property market. The labour market's cooling, doesn't seem to have fallen off the cliff. People make the biggest changes to their spending when they lose their job or when they see friends and family being made redundant. The housing market, again, cooling, hasn't fallen off a cliff. So if you take those things, it's not looking too bad. I'm not as pessimistic for next year as I was this time last year.
And wages are cooling,
but they're still above inflation. So real incomes are holding up.
I think wages, absolutely, as you say, that's that sort of key thing. And Andrea mentioned Next earlier. I think M&S have also flagged this, that going forwards, we need to look at how people are spending when they get their pay packets. I think Next have been so strong this year, 4 profit upgrades over the course of roughly the same number of months, because they were happily surprised by how much shoppers, when they got their pay rise impacted by inflation, they were actually choosing to go ahead and spend. But as the months go through and inflation continues to be a burden, that pay packet isn't going to mean as much as it did months earlier. So I think there could be times in 2024 when it gets a bit tough, and M&S guided to their strong performance being in the first half, with the second half being a weaker environment. So we have to see going forwards how strong wages stand up against inflation.
Are there any retailers that we should actually worry about going forward?
KPMG have warned of there being casualties early next year. They said online-only retailers are the ones to look at. And I think we have seen quite a lot of weakness in online-only fashion. So I think that could be a really difficult environment. And in terms of the strength of the high street, we already had some quite major calamities in 2023. I mean, Wilko is probably the main one to mention there. Biggest retail insolvency since Woolworths in 2008. So Christmas always tends to weigh on certain retailers. So I think come January, February, it could be a busy time.
That was perfect. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week. But in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review, and subscribe. It does help people find the show. This episode was hosted by me, Francine Lacqua, and Allegra Stratton. It was produced by Summer Sadi and Tiffany Choi. Additional editing by Blake Maples, and special thanks to Andrea Felsted and Katie Linsell.